From the campus of the University of Kentucky, you're listening to Behind the Blue.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Behind the Blue podcast. I'm Cody Kaiser with UK Public Relations and Marketing, and I'll be joined this week by UK Public Relations Director Jay Blanton. On each episode of Behind the Blue, we'll take an inside look at the work going on here in the UK family and the impact it's having on the university community, our state, nation, and world.
A man just stepped up and asked me if I was any better than the rest of them. No, I'm not. As a matter of fact, I'm worse than they are. They're out for all they can grab. They're one-way guys, but not me. I was going to play both ends against the middle. I sold out to them, but get this straight. I am no lamb led to the slaughter. I ran to it. I had the right idea when I started to talk to you people of America. The idea that you voters, you farmers, you businessmen, you working men, you ordinary citizens of whatever party are not the selfish scum that venal politicians make you out to be. I thought I could speak my piece straight out and forward. I thought I could tell you that this country of ours is young, it's not old, that we've just begun to grow, that all we need is courage, and from out of that courage will come a greatness greater than we ever dreamed. I wanted to tell you that we Americans are the hope of the world, and the secret of our great plenty is freedom, and we've got to share that secret and that plenty with the other nations of the world. And I wanted to tell you that we face a great problem, because when people are cold and hungry and scared, they gather together in panicky herds, ready to be led by communists and fascists who promise them bread for freedom and deliver neither. Those are the things I wanted to say to you, but I lost faith in you. I lost faith in myself. I was afraid I wouldn't become president. I forgot that the one thing you've got to do is speak your piece, no matter what.
That was Spencer Tracy from the 1948 film State of the Union, and you could argue that his words still have a ring of familiarity today. It's been said that in polite company one should never discuss religion or politics. However, we're going to ignore conventional wisdom and delve into one of those topics here, as Kentucky heads towards a more relevant primary election than in recent memory. Thankfully, we have extremely polite company in our guest, Dr. Stephen Voss of the University of Kentucky Department of Political Science, who's agreed to help us navigate some of what's going on around us. Originally from Louisiana, Dr. Voss earned both a B.A. in History and a B.A.J. in Print Journalism in 1990 from Louisiana State University, and in 1998 and 2000 earned a master's and then a Ph.D. in government from Harvard University. He joined the University of Kentucky in 1998, became assistant professor in 2000, attained tenure and promotion to associate professor in 2004, and began acting in the capacity of associate chair a year afterward, a job he held off and on until 2015. He served as president of the Kentucky Political Science Association in 2012 and 2013, and helped edit the KPSA's research journal during its inaugural issues. Dr. Voss's work has appeared in various professional journals, including the American Journal of Political Science, Journal of Politics, Public Opinion Quarterly, American Politics Research, International Studies Quarterly, and the inaugural edition of State Politics and Policy Quarterly. His current research looks at interethnic attitudes and attitudes towards migration in the United States and the Balkans. We sat down with Dr. Voss to discuss our current election cycle from both a state and national perspective, how it compares to previous presidential election cycles, and some thoughts on where we might be heading in November and beyond. Dr. Voss, the first thing that we should probably start off with is figuring out how you ended up here at the University of Kentucky.
I went on the job market, and this was the place that offered me a job. At first, there wasn't much choice. Now, I had the option of going back home. I was offered a job at my alma mater, Louisiana State, the year after I got here, but I liked the way things were going here. I liked Lexington so much. I said, thanks, but no thanks. I'm staying in Kentucky.
And that was in 1998?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, a year after I got here.
Okay. And so talk a little bit about your time here and kind of what that process has been as far as where you started and what your responsibilities entail now?
Well, I started out, I was supposed to be a bean counter. I was hired because I was thoroughly trained in quantitative analysis, methodology we call it. But the first time they put me in the big lecture hall with the undergrads in intro-American government, they realized that I really liked teaching the freshmen. And I've had that recurring gig as the front lines of our curriculum almost ever since.
Why do you like teaching?
Some people say they like teaching because they like working with the brightest students, the honor students, but that's not at all what I like. I like waking up the people who aren't the motivated or the bright students and seeing them make that transition to being adults who think about public affairs and start to view themselves in a different way from how they viewed themselves in high school. To me, turning a C student into a B student is a lot more exciting than having that kid who's going to be an A student walk in, get the A, and wander off again.
Have students changed a lot in the last, almost 20 years? I mean, do you notice many? Are they different? Do they have a different feeling about government? Do they or different orientation to learning, or not?
I've seen their ideologies zigzag. Right after 9/11, they shifted rightward, and then as the wars dragged on and as society changed, they drifted leftward again. That's kind of, it just moves back and forth. The real difference, and honestly, it's a challenge for me, is that they're less accustomed to reading, less accustomed to focused attention. And, a lot of those stereotypes about how the electronic overdose that we give to children is impeding their ability to think and learn. I've certainly seen that on the front lines of teaching. I basically teach the same way, but with new enhancements, but the same basic approach, write my exams the same way. And I've watched the class average drop over 10 percentage points in my course over the last couple of decades. It's just a measurable downward shift in performance.
Wow. And do you think that that's interesting? Not to maybe, I don't know if you want to segue away from the question about coursework, but do you think that has? I would think that you would think that has some clear implications for citizenry and voters, right?
Well, that's right. I mean, people learn from the new technologies, and in some ways, these tools that students have today, the ability to jump online and find things quickly, the ability to do searches. I mean, that gives them a whole learning tool that their predecessors didn't have. But, at the end of the day, if you're going to go to law school, you have to be able to read legal cases and follow detailed reasoning. And we're really not training high school students to be able to focus and do that kind of detailed reasoning.
There's a lot of criticism, I think, towards students today for being disengaged or way too self-absorbed or just not very concerned about anything other than maybe what they're Snapchatting or and kind of taking on causes that are, I think some people look at like wishful thinking or maybe oversensitive or anything like that. Are we really any different than where we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago as far as where students are, as far as their mentalities towards things like that?
Well, I think students are more engaged today. I mean, it helps that we're in the middle of historic times, but if anything, they're more engaged. I mean, they've been taught a scorn for the classroom. They've been taught a scorn for reading books in detail. They've been taught that when they're really doing something valuable is when they're doing things with their hands, when they're being active. And so, when I see prospective students come and they want to talk about whether they want to come to UK, I don't think I've ever been asked a question about a curriculum. I don't think I've ever been asked a question about the professors. They want to know basically how soon can I leave and where can I go? Study abroad and internships.
Kind of segueing into that as far as that level of being involved regarding this election, like turning to the 2016 presidential election, there's always been discussion of trying to get the youth vote. It's the same as trying to get the youth advertising dollar. Where are we in terms of that? I mean, there's a lot of discussion over that. I mean, speaking of from a presidential standpoint, there's been a lot of discussion of Bernie Sanders and his traction with young people on both sides of that. I mean, are we seeing, and maybe even overall, are we seeing more people, because the Republican numbers for the primaries have been greater than they were in the past, are we seeing an overall increase in involvement in that?
Yes, we're seeing people mobilize. We have this myth that when lots of people vote, when lots of people turn out, that's a sign of the health of the political system. And when those numbers drop, it means we're unhealthy. But that's really not supported by when people start going to the polls in droves. They usually do that when they're angry. Hatred is a better motivator than idealism. And usually what we see is in crisis times, that's when the numbers start to rise and people start going to the polls and things get less stable and get a little dangerous. You know, a happy, contented person stays home.
So if you were describing the electorate right now, how would you describe the electorate?
One word,
state of mind.
One word, fearful. And if you listen to the Sanders people, they're fearful. If you listen to the Trump people, they're fearful. And both parties are essentially being raided, partly by outsiders, partly by people who used to not be mobilized, who are scared of some things. Now, the Sanders people aren't fully scared of the same things as the Trump people. They've got different fears dominating them. But between the two, put them together, that's a whole lot of instability caused by fear. There are some commonalities, though, and we may be seeing a fundamental change in the political system, in the party system, because of one of the things the Sanders and the Trump people have in common, which is they're both hostile to what we call globalization. They're both concerned with international trade. They're both upset with the economic vulnerability of Americans, vulnerability of the United States, because of the competition we're seeing from the developing world, from other developed countries.
And I take it that in both cases, they don't see the parties or the quote-unquote establishment as being responsive to those concerns in any kind of productive way.
Well, free trade used to be one of the areas of consensus between the Democrats and the Republicans. I mean, Bill Clinton's the one who drove NAFTA through. The Republicans have generally been seen as supportive of international trade. You didn't have a major party vote to try to roll back open trade. Now, you got Ross Perot in the 90s, and he was the one who, sort of as an independent or Reform Party candidate, eventually held this banner against free trade, and he predicted NAFTA would result in a gigantic sucking sound of jobs toward Mexico. But in general, the two parties were in agreement. Well, not so clearly now, right? Hillary Clinton, with the pressure from Sanders, has started to sound a lot more against free trade than her husband was when he was president. And now we have Donald Trump as the likely Republican nominee, and he's seemed hostile to free trade.
What do you think, as we speak, most of the media would seem to suggest we do have two presumptive nominees. First of all, do you agree with that assessment? Is that the state of the race? I mean, Bernie Sanders mathematically almost can't win, and it appears that, well, the other candidates have dropped out on the Republican side. So do we have two nominees basically at this point? You know,
the Democrats have a lot of their seats at the convention given to people who have the job not because of how the voters voted, but because of positions they hold or positions they've held in the party. These are called superdelegates. And the superdelegates have given endorsements, and most of them have endorsed Hillary Clinton compared to Bernie Sanders. But because you have that group who they're really not committed until they finally cast that vote at the Democratic National Convention, there's a lot of, at least theoretically possible, leeway in where the Democratic contest could go.
But this isn't like 2008, is it? 2008, we were in a similar situation. Obama started to gain traction, and eventually, it was an Obama-Clinton race up until, I guess, June of that year, I think. It went a long way before she finally dropped out. But we're not exactly in the same situation here, are we?
No, because the main difference is that Hillary Clinton, who had the most endorsements from the superdelegates, also, on balance, is winning the contests. So instead of this concern that the superdelegates would flip it to Hillary Clinton and against Barack Obama, as people feared in 2008, they're just reinforcing right now the lead that she's posted. People are a little confused by this because if they've just been watching states, and state victories, they're getting the sense that Sanders is posting a lot of victories, sometimes a half dozen in a row. He had a half dozen in a row one time. But they're not really watching which states those are necessarily. And when you look, what you see is he's usually winning. He's doing better in caucuses, places that have very low turnout. He's doing better in places where independents can kind of raid the contest, because registered Democrats are more supportive of Hillary Clinton. He's also, and this is maybe the most important one, he's winning in places that tend to go Republican. And why that matters is that the Democrats don't have a straight person-by-person representation in their convention. States that usually vote for Democrats also get more clout in terms of delegates in the Democratic National Convention. She's winning Democratic states. He's winning the sort of small liberal minority in Republican states often. And that means he's not getting as much bang for his buck among those small electorates.
So again, as we speak, we're about a week in front of the Kentucky primary. And both candidates we're not used to in the last many years, used to anybody playing in our state. And we're almost overrun right now with members of the Clinton family and Senator Sanders stopping by Grater's and having ice cream. I mean, what is going on in Kentucky? Is this state in play in this Democratic primary?
Well, I mean, they're running out of contests. If Sanders can't turn a couple of contests his way that he wasn't supposed to win soon, he's in big trouble. And it's still, as I said, still open, given that partly they're playing for the confidence of the superdelegates who can switch. You know, a couple of unexpected Sanders victories could have more of an effect than just what he wins in those contests. It could affect the relationship of the Democratic Party to him. So it's something he needs to take seriously. And then meanwhile, this in most ways seems fertile ground for Hillary Clinton, an opportunity to sort of drive the final stake through the heart of the Bernie Sanders campaign. There's a history of the Clintons receiving good support here. In 2008, Hillary Clinton just crushed Barack Obama in the nomination. Partly that may have been race. Race does seem to have played an effect there, but I don't think it's only that that led her to do well. It's a closed primary system, which means you won't have those independents raiding the contest to help Bernie Sanders.
Right.
A lot of the Democrats are fairly conservative, and insofar as people are thinking ideologically about Clinton versus Sanders, she's seen as the more moderate of the two, and therefore a lot of those conservative Democrats that we have in this state, they're more likely to pull a lever for her or push a button for her than to do it for Sanders.
It seems like he did well as Donald Trump did well in states where independent voters were allowed to vote in the primaries as well. Is that accurate?
Yes, there's no doubt. If you look at how independents in the primaries were voting, they're favoring Trump on the Republican side, and they're favoring Sanders on the Democratic side.
And from a bigger picture, what does that, and you started to kind of go down this road, our party system, what does this kind of bode? Because obviously the Republican Party has gone the base has gone in a specific direction that people have accused of being less tolerant in some degree. Where does this put, I mean, could we see some sort of third party come up out of this that pulls voters from both sides, that pulls people from that were originally Republicans or originally Democrats and are just kind of fed up with both sides, who say this actually aligns more with what I believe in some way?
People who hope for the rise of a third party or an independent movement, you see where they're coming from, because you count the independents, and it's a growing share of the electorate. It's more independents than Democrats and more independents than Republicans. But really, the ability to stitch a coalition of those voters together is almost non-existent. You're looking at people who, some of them are libertarians, basically. In other words, they're against government both in your wallet and in your bedroom. And some of them are authoritarians. You know, they basically want laws dealing with both the economy and in private choices. You have some people who really are kind of in a muddy middle somewhere, people who are just uninformed. They don't really have a lot of commonality among them. And when people are really looking at those big numbers on independents, a lot of those people are just lying either to themselves or to the pollsters. And political scientists have seen this. After someone says they're independent, they'll follow up with a question and say, okay, you're independent, but on balance, would you say you lean more toward the Democrats or you lean more toward the Republicans? And if they'll confess a lean, those folks are almost as loyal to the party that they claim they're independent from it as some of the people who admitted they were Democrats or Republicans from the beginning. The actual number of pure independents, the actual people who, when you look at what they do rather than what they say, who are independent, you're talking barely more than 10% of the electorate. You're not going to build a party out of 10% of the electorate. Here's what's really changed. It used to be cool to say you belong to things, right? You joined a bowling league and you got a shirt that showed the name of your bowling team and you got your name stitched on it, and you joined clubs, and it was cool to be loyal. And now it's cool to say, I vote the candidate, not the party. I'm independent. And usually the data show liar.
But yet you did indicate a little bit earlier that there was this great anxiety and fear, which would seem to be something of a threat to both parties. I mean, are both parties in trouble? Are the Republicans farther along in that continuum? Because that seems to be where a lot of the attention is, about Trump being so far outside the establishment Republican Party, whatever that means, than Sanders per se. But do you see the parties as being in a state of turmoil or trouble that this election is indicative of?
I mean, we only have two major parties, and for most of the history of this country, we've only had two major parties. About once a generation, there's some kind of crisis in the party system. And the old things that the Democrats and the Republicans used to square off over just don't matter as much to people anymore. And there's a new set of issues, some new crisis that demands attention. And what we see is a sort of traumatic shift or dramatic shift in how people line up between one party and the other, and then it stabilizes again. And the reason it does that is because our electoral rules totally favor having two major parties. And in the long run, it's irrational not to vote for either the Democrats or the Republicans, whichever one's closer to you. Now, we've seen an actual case where both parties splintered, and the sorting, when it got done, resulted in a different party being formed. And that's when the Whigs fell apart over the issue of slavery. And what came up afterward was a new party, the Republican Party, rather than the Whig Party. But that's not the norm. Usually what happens is you get this shuffling of the deck chairs, and at the end you still have the two parties you used to have before, just defined in different ways and drawing support from different sets of people.
I'm assuming that the late 60s would be a good example of that, as far as some of the shuffling that happened with the southern states and civil rights and things like that. Is that a good example of that?
You know, they fight over what happened in the 60s within the literature. And I think it's because this crisis happened, but only in the U.S. South. And for the most part, the old allegiances, the old party leanings of Democrats and Republicans survived through the 60s. It was not all that different from who used to support whom back in the New Deal and after the Great Depression. But the South completely shifted, right? You got the black vote became loyally Democratic, where they used to be part of the party of Lincoln, Republicans, white Southerners who used to be outside of the mountains, almost entirely Democrats. Now they're overwhelmingly Republican. And what that did was create a system unlike any other, which is we're evenly divided. And basically since the 60s, we've had a country that could go either way. And we've flip-flopped from one party to the next in a way that had never happened before.
So is this, I don't want to misread what you're saying, but if we are at sort of an inflection point maybe for the parties, is this, and let's, for the sake of argument, presume we've got our presumptive nominees, but we're at this sort of inflection point with a lot of anxiety and fear. Is this comparable to another point? Is there another election that we can look at? Or are we really in some new terrain?
I don't think we have the sort of crisis that could crack the parties apart the way we did with the Civil War. But probably what this looks a little bit more like is what happened with the recession of 1896. The Democrats had a candidate rise up, William Jennings Bryan, who had a very strong message. He was not like a standard Democrat. He helped redefine the brand in a fundamental way. As Trump appears likely to do, in the short term, it hurt the party. It hurt the Democrats that William Jennings Bryan rose up, just as Trump appears to be a threat to the health of the Republicans. And after that, basically the Republicans ran the system after William Jennings Bryan helped redefine it. But it was still the Democrats and the Republicans after. You didn't get new parties or anything. You just got reshuffled parties.
So Hillary Clinton's the McKinley of this race? Is that is that the right comparison point? Karl Rove might not like that.
I guess she would be if you look at it that way, and I guess that makes Sanders Teddy Roosevelt, which is even less of a very fitting analogy.
Well, what's the state of play then in this race? What if for folks that are watching, and there appears to be, as we've talked about a little bit, a lot of interest, whatever is fueling the interest, a lot of interest in politics, a lot of interest in this race. For folks who would be listening to this or engaged in this process, what should they be looking for over the next 6 months? What are the kinds of issues that are going to define this race? We're asking you to get the crystal ball out a little bit, but tell us what's going to be happening, what we should be looking at.
Political parties are brands, and when people run under it, they're expecting the consumer to count on them being part of that brand. Donald Trump is in the process of possibly redefining the Republican brand. And a lot of those party insiders now have to decide, are they going to go along with the redefinition? Are they comfortable with what the Republican Party is going to be, at least for the next year, but possibly is going to be viewed much longer? Or are they willing to take 4 years in the wilderness in order to not let him redefine the Republican Party brand? And so that's the main thing to watch is, do you see someone who's basically a Republican run as an independent or run in a third party? How many people refuse to step up and join Trump's movement versus sitting it out so that this can just be a one-time, one-off anomaly, and then 4 years later have a sort of standard Republican candidate?
Do you think there's I'll characterize this as the way I've heard observers talk about it, that the way that Trump wants to redefine that Republican brand, or where he is taking the party, would be toward minority status as a party, that the demography's not in his favor. I mean, we're going to be a minority-majority party within, 10, 20 years? I mean, a minority-majority country. And 80% of Hispanics don't have a high view of him. 70% of women. I mean, I'm not trying to be ideological, but I'm just wondering, the way that he appears to be trying to redefine the party would not seem to be, at least from most observers I've heard, a way that would lead to a winning formula.
Remember I said earlier that the 1960s seemed to create a new system, right? Mm-hmm. And if you look what happened over that generation, two types of candidates won: Republicans and Southern Democrats. Okay, and that's what defined the system. And if the South swung to the Democrats because it was Jimmy Carter or Bill Clinton, the Democrats could win. And if the South stuck with the Republicans, then you got a Republican. That's where we've been. Right. Now, Barack Obama broke that pattern. Right, we're now talking Northern liberal Democrat, which the old system didn't give you any of. Right? So, did that represent yet another shift, fundamental shift in the system? I think the answer is yes. An electoral college that used to favor the Republican Party, because they had this swath of states that formed an L down the Rocky Mountains and across the South, that gave them a base that was difficult for the Democrats to crack. And now with the change in the population caused by immigration, and we're talking mostly Latinos, but also in some places Asians, places that used to be safely Republican are now in play. Places that used to be in play are now safely Democratic. The Electoral College now favors the Democratic Party. And this is the new system we're in. How do the Republicans break it? Right? Well, they have to have a Republican candidate who could appeal in some of those states, such as Nevada, where there's a large Latino population, such as Colorado, where there's a large Latino population, North Carolina, Virginia, Florida, the swing states. It's really hard to see how a Donald Trump, who is making race and ethnicity a core part of his appeal, swings those states away from their normal practice to the GOP. And if the Republicans are going to win in this system, presumably they're going to do it by having the sort of candidate who can win among those electorates where there are lots of Latinos.
But is it possible in the current, and we'll get to the Democrats, this isn't a one-sided kind of show, but is it possible for a Republican with that kind of appeal to make it through the primary process right now?
You know, the voters have to decide how much they're willing to demand that they get things their way versus how much they're willing to vote in a way that's a compromise in order to win. And the longer a party's supporters are in that wilderness, the longer they've been out of power, usually the more patient their interest groups and the more patient their voters are with some kind of compromise. When Dwight Eisenhower, busted into the New Deal party system and was able to win as a Republican because of his, military background and because he was a war hero, there were a lot of Republicans didn't want him because they had their more purist, more traditional Republican candidate they would have liked. But Eisenhower could win in a system that favored the Democrats. So they went ahead and put up with the compromise and took a guy who nobody even knew he was a Republican up until soon before he announced his presidential campaign. If Hillary Clinton wins, which, as I say, the Electoral College sure seems to favor, and most of the data, seems to favor, that will be, therefore, 3 presidential terms of a Democrat in charge, and fairly liberal Democrats, okay? Right. Appointing Supreme Court justices, appointing federal judges up and down the system, controlling public policy. Those folks who, were not willing to find a sort of compromise Republican this year, in 4 years may be looking at the situation a little differently.
But not for Trump. The Democratic primary would be really, really interesting, too. I mean, we've got a legitimate candidate who is a self-proclaimed Democratic socialist, right? I mean, so what's going on in the Democratic? I mean, are they maybe not as far along in this upheaval or turmoil, but are they in the Democrats in the same sort of transition stage or inflection point, too? I mean, Hillary Clinton seems to be being pushed to the left. A good bit on issues like trade and foreign affairs. What's going on over there?
It is possible that the main defining difference between what's happening with the Republicans and the Democrats are the rules. The rules of the game determine how the game gets played. And on the Republican side, ironically, they have the more democratic, small d, rules, which is to say you need to get a lot of support. It needs to be broad-based around the country. If you win, you get a big prize. A lot of things favored Trump's insurgency so that he could take over the Republican Party. Sanders was running under a different set of rules that did not favor an insurgency like this. A lot of people have criticized it, saying it's undemocratic. That's not entirely clear. If you have people form a club called the Democratic Party, normally you'd say, well, it's up to them to decide what they want to offer, right? And you say, okay, they're going to decide on a message, they're going to decide on a standard bearer, and they're going to offer it to us for us to either accept or reject. And so this idea of democracy is that basically we should be able to go raid their club, take it away from them, and decide who their candidate's going to be and what their message is going to be. It's not clear that's more democratic. Anyway, the Republican Party allowed that sort of raid from outside. The Democratic Party rules were more resistant to it.
Do we, because of the amount of, this to me seems like one of the more, in recent memory, volatile primary and election seasons, that we've gone through. Could we see, because there's been a lot of clamoring for it, could we see a change to the way the primaries are put together, the way the use of superdelegates, things like that? Are we at that point where we could see that?
Well, for sure. Democrats are talking about getting rid of their superdelegate rule and making their system more democratic, more immediately responsive to the voters. You have to wonder why in the world they're thinking that after watching Donald Trump take over the Republican Party. But, usually with the rules of a game, political actors are a lot like children. They're halfway through the Monopoly game and they realize that the rules aren't helping them and they want to change them partway through the game. Generally, the endorsement of principles and rules in electoral politics goes this way and that, depending on who's being helped. Early on, when it looked as though the superdelegates might give Clinton a victory, it was the Sanders supporters who were railing against the superdelegate system. Now that she started to win all the elected delegates and winning those big states, Bernie Sanders starts appealing to those superdelegates whose legitimacy was supposedly in question. these folks swing back and forth. It's really hard, when you're fighting to win, it's really hard to get any long-term loyalty to a set of rules and to accept them. What we do know is that usually systems that are too responsive, too democratic, are very unstable, and they cause a lot of chaos. And that's true whether you're talking about a Congress that can swing this way and that, and therefore can jerk whatever economic policy one way or the other and make things unstable, or a party message. If you have something very responsive to the voters, it will jerk this way and that, which isn't necessarily healthy for a party, because I just told you they're known as a brand, right? And if you walked into the local burger joint and you got a hamburger one day and it was one thing, and you walked in 2 days later, ordered what you thought was the same thing off the menu, and it was a completely different hamburger, you'd stop trusting the thing, and you wouldn't view buying a hamburger there next time as such a predictable experience and a reliable experience. Well, same thing with parties. If you got Donald Trump taking it one way, and you got Rand Paul taking it another, and you have Mitch McConnell taking it another, and Ted Cruz, at some point you don't know what a Republican is anymore, and you're less willing to walk in and buy that GOP.
That seems like a good argument for the viability of the Electoral College as well. I mean, in some ways, most people complain about that and about how that works, and sometimes don't have a fundamental understanding of that, but it seems like that works. There's a reason for that as well, to prevent some of that volatility.
I'm a big supporter of the Electoral College. Let me just play a thought experiment with you. Imagine that there were no Electoral College, and we had a close presidential election, and the returns, the outcome in every single precinct, in every county, in every state of the United States was going to matter in terms of the outcome and who got the White House. Do you think that would be a more predictable system, a more stable system than what we have now, where as long as we're watching Florida, Ohio, Nevada real closely, and both of the parties are all watching those closely, most things just go smoothly and people are able to participate in their process? I think it would be chaos if every vote in every precinct mattered. Now, that's bad for the people in Ohio, because it means they're not going to be able to watch TV without being inundated with nasty ads for a long time in 2016. But knowing that a few states are going to swing the thing adds a stability to a lot of the voting. It also means that a candidate needs a fairly broad-based support. Al Gore beat George W. Bush. Okay, in 2000. I don't mean in the Electoral College. I mean if you just looked at the popular vote, how people voted. But the reason he beat him is because he so overwhelmingly beat Bush in California and New York that it blew out the totals. George Bush, on the other hand, had an electorate that was much more widespread. It was not a concentrated appeal in a certain type of set of places, Los Angeles, New York City. It was a much broader based appeal across some cities, suburban areas, rural areas. The system rewards a broader base, and it punishes highly concentrated appeals that can be more divisive to the country. So I think that this one person, one vote sort of ideology, this hyper-democratic ideology that people seem to have under which they're operating, is fairly short-sighted.
Do we see a change within the next 4 years, next 8 years, to campaign finance laws?
You may, because some people believe that what happened in the Republican Party may be the Citizens United decision that sort of opened up elections to rampant spending, turning around to bite conservatives on the tail. You could be a serious candidate for president just because one or two rich people decided they liked you, and that's what helped create those Republican debate stages with a dozen people standing there arguing. So you might see some openness even on the Republican side to some reform in the system.
But what is that's an interesting point. What does a Trump candidacy do to that? Because he hasn't spent as much money. He's got no super PACs with him. He's not spent nearly as much money as Cruz, certainly, and I think certainly less than Jeb Bush. I mean, his celebrity, his brand, as we've talked about, seems to have sustained him through this. So it's not been about super PACs or the Citizens United decision, at least in the context of this presidential race, has it?
Celebrities have always been able to kind of buck the standard system, the sort of career ladder where you rise up, you get some donors who trust you, they pour a lot of money behind you. Donald Trump has, been able to generate millions of dollars of free campaign materials, right? Because he says outlandish things, they get spread all over the place. I mean, if you counted the names we've said, I guarantee Donald Trump has been said in this discussion more than any other name.
Sure.
And that's the way it's been the entire election. He's been able to command that attention. But he's a celebrity, so it doesn't mean the next person could replicate what he's done and also just come from nowhere and win because he had that celebrity background behind him. Another thing, to think about in terms of the role of money, rich people can break the normal pattern. Usually the folks who throw that money around are trying to win. They're smart. And they look for how they can find a horse that's going to win the race, and that's what they bet on, right? Just like you might do at the Kentucky Derby. When it's your own money, you don't care about finding the winner. You want to be the winner, and so when a wealthy person enters a race, they can really upset the apple cart in terms of the relationship between who has the most money and who wins. And all it goes to show you is that it's really not the money. The money matters because you can't get your message out without it.
Right.
But it's the money chasing the winners, not the winners getting bought. Basically the electorate getting bought by the money. Rich people who self-finance have a terrible record because it is indeed not about the money.
The attention, we just talked about the attention that the national election is having on Kentucky for a primary. I'm assuming that that's probably going to continue because there's so much polarization through the general election. How does that impact Kentucky races? We have a Senate race. We have there are a lot of things going in play this year for us here. How does that affect that?
Well, Kentucky progressives are kind of trying to drum up support for a challenge to Mayor Jim Gray. He's the sort of expected nominee for the Democratic Party, but they're trying to build up some energy behind a challenge to him. And insofar as Bernie Sanders still needs the support of progressive voters, you could see some spillover where Bernie Sanders mobilizes the left, and then they go down the ballot, and they also influence the Democratic Senate nomination contest. I don't know that that's taken off though, and of course the problem is we have so little polling here to really know what's taking off. We probably won't find out until those votes are actually cast.
You worked with the Martin School on a political polling. There was something that the Martin School did recently with political polling.
That's right.
What exactly? Explain that a little bit.
Okay, so Kentucky's polls have done a bad job predicting outcomes. Jack Conway, Attorney General, was supposed to win as governor, but the Republican Matt Bevin won instead. Prior to that, Mitch McConnell did look as though he was going to win his Senate race, but he beat Secretary of State Grimes by far more than the polls suggested. But it's not only about Kentucky, because in general in 2014 in the Senate races, the polls tended to be biased away from Republicans toward Democratic candidates by about 2 to 3%. And so the puzzle is what's going on with polling, why is it sometimes messing up really badly, and why does it seem to be sort of systematically messing up these days?
And are there some particular issues in Kentucky that are influencing that?
Yeah, a little bit of it might be unique to Kentucky in that it appears as though conservative voters here may just not be cooperating with the polls. And this was expected. I mean, there's a message there on the right, message there in the Tea Party of sort of suspicion of institutions and suspicion of academics, right? Mm-hmm. Suspicion of universities. And when they're contacted by a representative of a polling firm, there may be more reluctance to cooperate, more suspicion of what they're up to. And we saw this, for example, there's a political scientist at another Kentucky institution did an exit poll in Boyle County, I believe it was, to see how people voted, and he found something interesting, which was that even in his little poll, it looked as though Conway did better than he actually did in the voting returns. The Republican numbers were underestimated. Why that matters is because, unlike with regular polls, he didn't have to guess who would vote or not. And some of the problem is guessing who will vote, but that wasn't his problem because he was watching them. He was catching them as they came out.
Right.
So he knew they voted. And even then, the numbers for the Democrat looked higher than the vote returns would suggest they really were.
So if you're a pollster working in Kentucky, is there a way to account for that? What do you do?
Yeah, they're tricks they have. They're more expensive, but they're tricks they have to get better responses. They can use what's called callbacks. In other words, when somebody refuses the first time, you don't just move on. You try to follow up a couple of times, and maybe they'll break down and give it to you. There's a question of how you deal with cell phones. Now, I find this interesting. I hope you do too.
Well, I was going to ask about that because the age of our electorate and also the technology involved in how they communicate, I'm sure that plays a huge part.
Right. So the presumption is if we miss cell phones, we're going to miss young voters, and that means we're going to miss people on the left. We're going to miss Bernie Sanders supporters. That's what you'd think. But they've tried to redesign the polls to get at cell phone people indirectly. So, for example, they'll use online methods to try to get some cell phone users. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the experts who was at that Martin School polling forum in North Carolina did a comparison between people he got online who were cell phone owners versus actual people he got calling cell phone numbers, contacting cell phone users. And what he found was that the online version of the cell phone user was much more liberal than the actual cell phone users he contacted through a more direct but more expensive method. So that's part of the story, possibly, for why last couple of years we've been underestimating Republican support. The attempt to get cell phone users went too far and got people who tilted more leftward than the average cell phone. I mean, everybody's got cell phones these days, so you wouldn't expect anymore it to be too skewed toward either party. But the ones you can get online, that's who's skewed. Those online people tend left.
I don't know if this works or not. Fill in the blank, maybe. This is the most fascinating election cycle since blank.
Oh, good grief. If I were going to look for the closest comparison, I'd say 1968. That's at least back to 1968. Because in 1968, you had another outsider challenge, which was George Wallace. And George Wallace mobilized with some of the same messages and some of the same appeal. A lot of the voters, Trump's mobilizing. So you had that three-way race for a while. Now it didn't pan out. Wallace didn't succeed, but it made people wonder where things were going. Not to mention, that was a period of chaos in 1968. You had Vietnam, you had assassinations, you'd had years of riots. You were at the tail end of the civil rights movement. One historian called the late 60s America's last suicide attempt. So, in terms of both the risk and the possibility of remaking the future, I would look to the 1968 election as the closest thing we've got.
Anything we didn't ask, maybe, that you feel like is important to point out?
I'm going to give you a lot of dead air here. You're going to have to chop this out.
That's okay. No, it's all right.
No, we covered the waterfront. I know.
I mean, there's, I teach a whole course on this. There are lots of insights about elections and voting and campaigning that can interest people when they're involved with it. But I don't know. I think we hit the highlights for what regular folks want to hear. We did for people who won't have to take my exam.
Well, we did talk about students at the beginning. And maybe to kind of circle back. Well, what do you find? You sort of alluded to this, but do you find students coming in are very interested in politics? You hear kind of waxing and waning, that pendulum swinging about the interest of students, but we talked about their level of engagement a little bit. But what do you see about students right now and their interest in politics?
I teach political science, so my advanced students have always, to a large degree, been engaged. But I was taken aback by how attentive and how engaged the intro students were with what's going on. Barack Obama was supposed to really mobilize and excite the young, but I did not see this in 2008. I did not see this in 2012. Students who I'm sure don't think of themselves as political, students who normally would not have been political. When we got to that part of the Intro-American Government course dealing with elections and the nomination contest and the Electoral College, that was easily the most engaged those students were all semester. And they were ready to go into the weeds. I mean, questions about delegate rules not even in 2008 did I see anything like this level of engagement.
Well, before we wrap up, we're going to take a moment for 5 questions. Before we started recording, I had you draw 5 questions out of a random set group, and these don't have anything to do with really anything that we've been talking about. So, and nothing to really sit and ponder on too greatly, but we're going to rapid fire these out.
This is the part that gets me fired, right?
Could
you
be.
have 10.
No,
You're
no,
right.
no. Who plays your part in the movie about your life?
Oh, gosh, it has to be somebody alive.
Well, not necessarily. You can reach back. Ideally, who would have?
Well, Anthony Perkins.
Okay.
If I can raise the dead.
Sure, fair enough.
I don't know, maybe Benedict Cumberbatch. He's kind of got.
That's a
he's
solid
tall
choice.
and
All right, that's
thin,
good,
and
that's good.
If he can drop the accent.
That's a solid choice. Upon your death, you can come back as an animal of your choice: land, sea, or air.
I would have to fly. So I don't know, a hawk.
Okay.
I have a hawk that lives outside my Patterson office tower office at times and comes talks to me through the window. So I want to go fly with my friend the hawk.
Nice. What is the greatest invention in your lifetime and why?
My dad used to tell a story when I was a kid about when the aliens came down and landed their flying saucer in our backyard, what he would do. And what he said is, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to ask them if I can have their watch. And he used to describe all the things the aliens' watch would do, and let me tell you, it was a smartphone.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
The technology that gives you the most trouble is?
The smartphone. I don't have one. I have a flip phone. Look, my dad might have talked to the aliens. I haven't talked to them yet.
Finally, name the last book you read or are currently reading.
Oh, I just got finished reading Jane Eyre to my children, so I'll go with that.
Okay, classic. Sticking with classics. Well, that's all the time we have. So, Dr. Voss, thank you very much for joining us, and we appreciate the time and the insight.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Great.
Thank you for joining us on this edition of Behind the Blue. For more information about this episode or any other episode, visit us online at uky.edu/behindtheblue. You can send questions or comments via email to behindtheblue@uky.edu or tweet your questions using #BehindTheBlue.